Alrighty, folks, we're back with another episode of the Overhand Hour. Couple week layoff here. We had some good fight nights in between. That last Adesanya card, some big fireworks in that. But we got another one coming up this weekend, UFC 288 with the 135-pound strap on the line. Colin, how are we feeling about this card?
Feeling okay. I think we were coming down. We talked about it before we came on, just coming down a little bit from the past couple main event nights, which is probably to be expected. It was a crazy run they had the last 4-5 fight nights, or not fight nights, main event nights, whatever it was. But definitely a little bit of a setback here, but can't be mad about the return of Cejudo against a guy like Sterling. It should be a fun one. And then Burns and Muhammad is definitely one to look forward to. So,
Yeah. We were talking about it. I mean, this kind of seems to have been a trend with the UFC the last few years. They take the layoff between December and January, couple weeks there, and they typically try to come back pretty strong with some good events to start the year off, which they did for sure. And then, it's in the summer period now where there's definitely some good fights. But obviously, everyone looks forward to International Fight Week in Vegas in July, and then they always close out the year pretty strong. So, the cards don't necessarily have the same star power that they had early in the year. But one thing we talked about on this one is, the main card, while it might not be as explosive as some of the other ones, there's definitely some really good prelims on this card to look for. So I'll shoot it back to you there. Is there one in particular that you're looking at? I got a few, honestly, that seem pretty exciting, but one that sticks out to you?
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, you could definitely handpick a bunch of these and talk away about them, and it should be definitely interesting prelim. I think ESPN Plus. If you have ESPN Plus, definitely tune in on those more so than maybe other cards, especially with the way the main card just fell apart. But anyways, I'll talk about Zhumagulov versus Estevam. I think this is a really intriguing fight. The odds are fairly close. Estevam coming in at a almost minus 200 favorite. But I really like Zhumagulov. I know he struggled of late, but his pace is extremely fun to watch. And I don't necessarily I don't think giving out a pick here is what I want to do, because both guys, I mean, Estevam is kind of a killer, coming in at 11-0. Really solid fighter, and Zhumagulov's been on a huge slide lately. Honestly, probably seems like it might be a fight where he's fighting for his UFC life, which is upsetting because, again, I really like watching his fights. His pace is extremely high. It's nonstop action, and he's had all these 3-round fights that have had that great action. He's thrown I think he threw like 230 strikes attempts last time. So definitely the output's there. But Estevam, coming in, I believe he, 11-0. I'm looking at it right now, and just off the Dana White Contender Series back in September. So, this kind of seems like one of those fights where guy on his way out of the UFC, guy coming in the UFC, Dana might be setting up Estevam for a little easy fight, put on a show, get his name known. But Zhumagulov's tough, and like I said, the output is there enough to where if it goes to a judge's decision, he can win based off that output and the optics of the fight, striking wise. But yeah, I'll probably lean Estevam here just because it seems like, again, one of those fights where Zhumagulov might be on his way out. Estevam maybe a new up-and-comer possibly. But regardless, should be high pace, high action. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, definitely one I'm looking forward to as well. And, you look at a guy in Zalgas, and in his last 3 fights, 2 of them have went to a split decision. And, you're talking against Johnson and then Molina, 2 pretty game opponents. And then he got knocked out by, is it Cape or Cape? I always mess this one up. Yeah. Whatever it is, got knocked out by him. And that kind of stopped, I think up to that point he was 14-5-ish. had some good fights in the UFC, had been facing some veterans, so looked like a guy that might be trending up. And then you're right, he just kind of hit this slide. And, like you said, even though they were split decisions, the UFC can be pretty unforgiving with those because, at the end of the day, a loss is a loss. And we talked about it on one of the first episodes we did, but, a guy fighting out of my hometown, Denver, Yusuf Zalal, had a split decision that he pretty clearly won, and the judges kind of screwed up, and he was let go of after that fight and is now kind of on the route to try and getting back. So when it comes to that stuff, they can be pretty unforgiving. And I actually listened to Chael Sonnen talking this weekend about a fighter that he trains with, younger guy coming up who's just been crushing everyone. And he reached out to Chael and said, how do I break into the UFC? I think I'm doing everything right, yada, yada. And Hunter Campbell, one of the executives at the UFC, actually got back to Chael and said he is really impressive. He actually appeared on the Contender Series and won that fight. But the roster is so full right now that, if you're trending towards the bottom of the pack of someone that they may let go, you definitely need a win. And so I think Zalgas for sure needs a win here. And yeah, to your point, Estevam, I mean, it's kind of a prove yourself type of fight. He's 11-0, undefeated, had an impressive fight on the Contender Series. And, in a guy like Zalgas, I feel like it's a pretty decent jump for him, even though he's on a skid just based on his experience in the UFC and the guys he's faced. He's seen a lot. So it definitely is a proving point for Estevam. I'm slightly leaning towards him, but kind of with you there. I may end up staying away from this. I haven't looked at overs and unders yet, but it will definitely be an exciting fight because I think you got Zalgas, a guy that needs to prove himself and also has the high output, and then an up-and-comer who is obviously trying to prove themselves because this is his first, UFC fight outside of the Contender Series. So it's one of those, perfect storms where both guys need to put on a good show here. And so I think you're right. That is definitely one to look out for there, and close odds. So we'll be monitoring the rest of the props as it comes closer. The money line's tough right now, but it's one to look for. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see a finish in this one, to be honest with you.
I would agree.
Both guys need it. I would say Zalgas needs it more, but because of that, there's going to be openings for Estevam. So, very likely you see a finish there, even though it's in the 125-pound division where you don't see quite as many finishes. It should be quite a banger. So scrolling through here, I mean, again, so many good fights to look for. This isn't mine to look for, but Marina Rodriguez, kind of surprising to see her so low on the prelims against Verna. She is recently coming out of a title challenge where she put on a hell of a performance against Shevchenko. And I would think that she is still right there, especially with being young, being 16-2, a great striker in that division. That's one that I was just surprised at the placement on the card. But then when you look at the feature prelim, it is hard for me to say that this won't be the fight of the night because you have two guys that are going in there and they're both going forward. And I'm talking about Drew Dober versus Matt Steamroller Fravola. I really like Drew in this one. He is coming off a 3-0 2022. Some really impressive knockouts, including the most recent one against Bobby Green, a guy that is known to being a slick striker that doesn't get caught like that. So both these guys, I think, are going to push the pace, and it's hard to see this one going into the third round. They're both durable, but they both also swing. So I like Dober in this one. I like him by knockout. Haven't seen the odds on that yet, but he's coming in at around minus 210, 200 on the money line. This is a great fight. And I think that I was talking to you a little bit before. I was really surprised to see this was on the prelims just based off of the two guys involved. And, they've both been on pretty good little runs. And, you talk about a guy in Frivola who doesn't have quite as many fights, but he's been a finisher as of recent. You know, he's in his last 3 fights, he's knocked 2 guys out and he's been knocked out once. So that's a pretty telling tape of what to look forward to. And then Dober, obviously, 3 finishes in 2022. So I just can't see this fight being bad. I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah, it's I agree with you. It's interesting that this didn't make the main card versus, and nothing against the bottom couple fights on the main card. I think it makes sense to have Evloev on the main card, name like his and what he's, I mean, a 16-0 fighter, probably earned his way onto a main card. But looking at the Gracie Jourdain fight, we talked about it. Is Gracie on there just because of his last name, which is
Mm.
it's entirely possible. Not to say he's a bad fighter by any means. Of course, he's a great fighter. But to talk just about the fight, yeah, I don't. There, you hit it on the head. I don't really see a way, and this doesn't end in extreme violence. Both guys are going to go balls to the wall, like you said, pressing the gas pedal forward, and it should be an entertaining fight. I don't think there's much else to say about it from
Yeah.
a breakdown standpoint. It should be both guys putting their heads down and going right at each other.
Yeah. And another point I wanted to make on it that, again, surprises me a little more about it not being on the main card is obviously styles make fights. I think this fight is going to be great based on the 2 styles. So that's one thing to consider. But it's just weird because, both guys pretty tenured in the UFC. They've been around for a while now, especially Dober and, both big names as well. I agree with you. We'll get to that fight, but Gracie starting out the main card definitely has to be just from the family name, which, again, I don't want to discredit that too much because they are the most legendary BJJ family in the history. And then, you talk about the early Gracies that fought in the first UFC events ever. Like, that is really cool to see it come full circle. And not to mention he's a huge prospect, but just the 2 names there, it's like, man, you could definitely call both of them vets, I think. Both in their prime, both knockout artists. It's weird to see it not on the main card. And so that's why it was just a layup for me as my prelim to watch, because I think it's a main card type of fight. I think there are plenty of cards that it could, be the second or third fight of the night on there. So yeah, definitely watch for that one. Tune in. That one will be on ESPN Plus as well. Forgot to throw out the times at the beginning for you guys. So the early prelims start at 4. The regular prelims will start at 6, and then you'll have that main card at 8. So
that Mountain Time.
That is Mountain Time. Yes, I forget to adjust for Eastern. I know that's standard. Add 2 hours.
You're good.
But speaking of the main card, let's roll right into it. So we already talked about that first fight a little bit. Outside of the name, he is a rising prospect, and they did try to throw him into the heat very early in his career. He had the UFC Fight Night win against Caceres, where he submitted him, which that is very impressive because Caceres himself is sneaky on the ground. And then he had the decision loss to Cub Swanson, who is a vet of the sport. And reminder, this is about a 2.5-year layoff for Gracie. So that fight took place October 12th of 2019. And for those of you that maybe weren't following or don't remember, 2019 and 2020, Cub Swanson was actually looking really good, even though it was still towards the tail end of his career. He moved down in weight classes and he was looking sharp, definitely trending upwards and kind of making that, a lot of the veterans make that last title push where they change up some things. Maybe it's weight class, maybe it's training camp. But he was looking good and he looked really good in that fight. And, fair play, he won the decision. But Gracie is definitely a contender to look for. And with a guy that has that much fight IQ and experienced people around him, the layoff may actually work in his favor. They may have picked up on something that, especially in that Cub fight that he needed to work on. And I would assume he's just been drilling the hell out of all those discrepancies the last few years. And, coming out against a guy in Jourdain who that is definitely not a layup fight either. That guy's a savage. So I'm looking forward to this fight. Again, I don't necessarily agree that it's a main card fight, but it's going to be a really good fight, I think. And there's just questions to be answered about Gracie and where he stands after the layoff.
I think Gracie gets it done by submission here. I think he actually makes it look pretty easy. And nothing against Jourdain. I just think, like you said, he's going to have guys surrounding him in that just less than 4-year layoff, which is crazy. But he's going to have guys surrounding him they will be training nonstop. Like I expect his game to be extremely honed and look really sharp. Maybe some fight rust he's going to have to shake off early, but I think this is a bad matchup for Jourdain. I like Jourdain as a fighter. I just don't think stylistically this is a great matchup for him, and especially coming off of losses against Burgos and against Wood, who, respectable losses. I think this works out really well in Gracie's favor, and I'm really surprised that he's actually not the favorite, to be honest with you. Yeah. I love him at plus 155, and I would be hammering that all day. So I'm gonna.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It's tempting to take him by submission. The only thing that worries me is with the layoff, has he been striking a bunch, and is that the point he's coming out to prove? I think where you're already getting him at plus money, it's it's a value pick regardless, and you can easily see a route for him to win a decision as well. And this is one of those where you have these jiu-jitsu specialists, and he is legitimately at the top of the food chain, the highest it can get when it comes to jiu-jitsu. So until they get to that upper echelon of people who are close to the same level as them, and then maybe you run into a heavy wrestler who's able to implement pressure early on, these jiu-jitsu guys can have a lot of success being specialists, because all it takes is one exchange to get it to the ground, and it's a wrap. Yep. And that's just, it's not 100% of the time, obviously, but that being said, it happens quite often when you get a guy who is just not even close to the standard of jiu-jitsu, and just thinking about how many ways the fight can get to the ground, like it takes one of those to happen, and that could be the night for him. So yeah, I agree. I like him at plus money. Nothing against Charles, like you said, he's a great fighter, savage fighter, but savage doesn't always cut it when you stand up against one of these specialists. So I agree with you wholeheartedly there. Plus 155 to plus 170 is what I'm seeing. Great value pick. We'll move on to the next fight. A bit of a bigger name here in Evloev,
I think.
Evloev. Going up against Diego Lopez. And it's another one of those fights where this is kind of Lopez's, I guess, his test. But he's one of those guys that has so much experience in other organizations that you do have an idea of what you're going to get. So it's not the case of he's had somewhere between 7 and 10 fights, and it's, been against a bunch of lower guys that he's dominated. He has an extensive fight background. That being said, he is going up against a 16-0 killer. So what do you like in this one, and how do you see the match kind of breaking down there?
Yeah, it's too bad that Mitchell's injury had to pull out, and then Lopez is taking this on short notice. And I don't believe that odds have even been released for this fight yet, because that was just announced very recently. I'm going to assume that Evloev is going to be a pretty hefty favorite, just based off of not only his skill set and record, but the fact that it's a short notice fight. Taking it up against a guy like Evloev is going to be extremely difficult. I don't have much else to say on the fact that I just think Evloev gets the job done. I think he does a really good job at mixing up his game in general, and I think it's going to pose problems for Lopez. But yeah, just another one of those fights on this card that kind of just it's a shame because you have names like Evloev and Mitchell going up against each other, and you get excited for that fight, and then one guy pulls out, and it kind of takes away some of the allure, even though Evloev's an entertaining fighter himself to watch.
Yeah.
So tough,
But
but yeah, I'm gonna go Evloev.
by all regards, I mean, going back to the conversation we were just having with Chael Sonnen talking to Hunter Campbell about how you get into the UFC and start making your name there. I think this is a brilliant move for Lopez because to me it's kind of a not a no risk fight, but he's taking it on short notice. He's really new to the UFC and going up against the guy who everyone expects him to lose to. So if he goes out there and pulls off a win, his stock shoots directly up.
Big time, big time.
And
he
again,
poses a lot of threats too. I'm not saying he doesn't pose a lot of threats. Sure. I mean, 11 subs, 8 knockouts. It's not that. It's just that the short notice is it's tough against a guy like that.
Well, and it's a fight to look for too, because these short notice fights, when guys don't have a full camp to prepare, they're aware of that a lot of times, and they know, he could very well be a guy that stays in year-round great shape. But regardless, that 8 to 12 week fight camp makes a huge difference, because that's when you're honing in on, what your opponent's doing. The conditioning steps up big time. So in a lot of these short notice fights, you see the guy that took it on short notice come out firing, because they're trying to get the job done early so that they don't run into issues later on with gassing out. And I think it'll be a fun fight for that reason. It'll kind of force the hand there a little bit, if you know what I'm saying. So it's like, I'm going to finish you or you're going to finish me type of deal. But just smart on his part, because you only hear respect from Dana, Hunter, and all those guys about fighters taking fights on short notice, especially to save pay-per-view cards like this. So for me, it's a great decision on his part, and I don't think a loss drops his stock that much, but a win skyrockets it. So it again, smart fight. And also Evloev. Did I say that right?
Evloev.
God. But for him, it's like he's expected to get the job done. He needs to get the job done, or he scoots to 16-1. That we've seen this happen time and time again, where these undefeated fighters taste defeat for the first time, and that starts a little bit of a skid for them. So he needs to, definitely be taking this fight serious and know what he has to do in it. And so I think, it makes for a good fight. Again, it's not a ton of star power there, but still a good fight. And then we move on to the third match on the main card. Former title holder and challenger as of recent, Jessica Andrade, going up against Jan Jeonen. I think I might have actually gotten that one right. But this is a pretty exciting fight to me, just because Andrade has been in this sort of limbo state where she's right there for the title, and then she drops one. And so it's like she needs to start piling these wins up a little bit if she wants to get thrown into that discussion again, because this win 2, lose 1, or win 1, lose 1, just that's not the route to the title. And I'm sure she knows that. She's coming in at like minus 200. So it'll be a good fight. And, for Jan, she's coming off a majority decision against Mackenzie Dern, who is another name that's been thrown around in the title mix. So good win there. Lost a split decision to Marina Rodriguez, who we talked about earlier. So she's game. They're both game. I think it'll make for a good women's fight.
Yeah, and I think it's tough because Andrade, coming off that Blanchfield loss, she did not look good at all.
No.
She got dominated in that fight, and it's interesting that she's coming off of that as a minus 200 favorite. But at the same time, this is definitely a stylistic matchup that's more favorable. Not necessarily that it's like ideal for her, with Janon's skill set, but Blanchfield being very good on the ground, and Andrade being more of a striker, power puncher, whatever. I I don't hate Jianan at the price that she's at. Being at plus 170, I think she's really good on her feet and she's smart. Andrade is a bit more of a bull. She'll come at you and she's looking to finish you, while Jianan will kind of she can jab you to death and just kind of make you fall asleep a little bit. Um, and I think she gets the job done by a decision. I don't think she'll finish Andrade on the feet, and I don't think this fight goes to the ground. But um, I think she finds a way to get it done by decision if she can weather an early storm. I'm expecting from Andrade.
Here's going to be my first disagreement with you. I think it does go to the ground, and
Okay.
that might surprise some people, but I think that Andrade has such a glaring advantage on the ground,
Yeah.
and she doesn't always use that. You're right; she 100% is a power puncher, and definitely a female fighter that likes to put on a show.
Hmm.
A well-recognized name in the sport. However, when you look at Jean, she has never submitted anyone, and she's been submitted once. And so I think going up against someone like Andrade, who in her earlier days, especially when she was, getting up to the belt, she used that wrestling a lot. And she's got great jujitsu. So while I do agree that Jean's path to victory is exactly what you said, just pick her apart. And I think she can do that, especially you talked about the last fight with Andrade and Blanchfield. She looked clueless in that fight, and not to be too harsh, but I thought she was going to dominate that fight, and she got dominated. It wasn't really competitive at any point. Um, and that being said, she's a former champion. She knows how to make adjustments.
Hmm.
I think she realizes that it's kind of now or never to make another push. And so, to me, at least, I would think winning by any means possible is the route there. So I think she does try to get it to the ground, and if she does, I think she submits Jean. However, if it stays on the feet, I'm with you there. I think it looks pretty similar to that last fight with Blanchfield, where she just can't really find the range.
Yeah.
Jean, same type of deal. She's a couple inches taller, more inches in reach, and that poses a problem for some of those, shorter, stockier fighters. So personally, I think she tries to get it to the ground, but if she doesn't, it's hard to see her winning. So
Hmm.
I'm going to take her by submission there. I think maybe sprinkle a little bit on the money line with John,
Yeah.
but it's a good fight. It's
Hmm.
again a styles make fight, and we'll see which Jessica comes out because she's kind of a wild card to be honest with who you're going to see.
Definitely.
Um, that's a good fight there, and then we move on to our main two. we've we've hated on the card a little bit, but these two fights for sure are great fights, and I'm definitely looking forward to both of them. Starting off with the first one here, you have Bilal Muhammad, who has been on an absolute tear, and there is a very legitimate argument to be made that he should have already fought for that belt. Um, and then a guy in Burns who, did fight for the belt, lost, but has come back extremely strong. He's been, I want to, this is his already his third fight this year, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, so he's been very active, and to me, I think he's a guy that probably benefits from that when his striking sharp. Again, he's a guy like Gracie who has world-class jujitsu. That's always going to be there for him. If it does go to the ground, which we'll see. That is what I'm most curious about with this fight, with Bilal being a very good wrestler and no stranger to taking guys to the ground. Does he want to do that with Gilbert? Because when you look back to the Usman fight, Gilbert versus Usman was very reluctant to shoot any takedowns. He very clearly wanted that to stay on the feet. So I'm curious to see which route Bilal takes, because I think Burns is a guy that can kind of react to the situation and fight the fight that's being fought. Um, but does Bilal want to keep it standing, or does he shoot the takedowns and just trust that his pressure and ground and pound will wear on Burns and he won't get caught in one of those submissions? I don't know. That's why I think it's a really interesting fight. I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting, like you said, stylistically, where the fight goes and how it goes. And I think I like Burns in this fight. I think it's the only reason I'm hesitant, to be honest with you, is the fact that he's taking it on less than a month's notice in a fight that is, in my opinion, and like you have kind of alluded to and talked about briefly, this is a title contender fight. This is who should get the next shot at this belt. And it's really interesting that Gilbert takes this fight on less than a month's notice, and it's gangster, and he should be rewarded for this if he wins the fight, no doubt. And obviously, Muhammad, if he puts Burns on his resume as a win, that's a no doubt, title shot for
Yeah,
both guys. So
100%.
from that, and both guys also taking a 5-round fight again, gangster, instead of just leaving it to a 3-round fight. They're taking this seriously, and they're out there to prove something. So I respect to both guys in that aspect, and I just think the difference with Muhammad fighting Burns versus other guys he fought is, Bilal has some, I mean, definitely has some good wins under his belt. Especially, I mean, the Stephen Thompson win's interesting because he can kind of neutralize him on the ground pretty easily.
Yeah.
And so that I mean, definitely a good notch on the belt, but I just think Burns' resume speaks for itself compared to Bilal's, which again, Bilal's Bilal's resume is fine. Luque, Brady, Stephen Thompson, all that, but I really think Burns has gotten a bit of a raw end of a deal in some fights,
Mhm.
and I mean his losses are to his recent losses are to Hamzat and Usman, and like you said, Usman didn't want that fight to go to the ground, and Burns rocked Usman, and then also he took a round from Hamzat and made that. I think a lot of people at that point in Hamzat's when Hamzat was on that tear, he's still on the tear, but he hasn't fought in a while. But
Yeah.
people just saw him as invincible, like just an unstoppable force. And Burns went in there and said, "Hey, like I deserve to be in the mix for this title shot." And he went out there and put on a good show. And he was a round away from getting what I probably would have turned into a title shot, but he didn't. And then he went out to win his next one. But whatever.
Yeah.
With this fight, I think Bilal is very good at, like, when he gets you down, he keeps you down. But Burns does not, just he won't sit there. He's too good, and he knows what to do. Um, and I think that's going to serve him really well in this fight if Bilal does get him down. And I think Burns definitely has an advantage on the feet. And I just personally think this fight deserves to be where the odds are at, with Burns as a slight favorite, and I like Burns as a slight favorite.
Yeah. I mean, to me, if this fight was not short notice, I think the odds would look a lot different. And uh,
Yes.
which is props to Gilbert, because I think there are 1 to 2 guys in this division that if they took a short notice fight against Bilal would come in as a favorite. And again, we always go back to the saying of styles make fights. And I think you hit a lot of those points on the head. It's, you look at Bilal's resume, which is great, like we discussed, but you've got Sean Brady, Vicente Luque, Stephen Thompson in the last 3, all heavy strikers. All of them very much striking specialists. I know Luque has a good ground game when he wants to use it, but he he's not necessarily known for being a huge threat there, right?
Yeah.
And so
Hmm.
I think for Bilal, the game plan was pretty easy in those fights. Get the fight to the ground, control it, win the fight. Um, he had the knockout against Brady, which was great, but it was still following the same game plan that got him there. Um, and then you look at a guy in Burns, you're not going to do that to him. First of all, you're 100% correct there. He's
Hmm.
so active on the ground, and to me, the biggest comparison you can make here, and why I think that Burns is a big lock as long as he's injury free, he's in good shape and everything, because he did fight just less than a month ago against Jorge Masvidal. Um, is you look at that fight against Chimaev. Chimaev has made everyone else's wrestling look like garbage. He has made
Yeah.
it seem like he is on a completely different level, kind of, Khabib-esque, but at times I would argue even more dominant than Khabib was because he's a guy that finishes on the ground as well. He'll take you down, control you, but he's going for the finish. Um, and the fact that Gilbert dealt with that so well and got through that fight, and a lot of people argue he won that fight, and it was razor close. To me, I think that Chimaev is a bigger threat in that department than Bilal is. And so then if it does stay on the feet, absolutely, I think Burns has the advantage there. So minus 120, I love that. And I think that, had he had a full camp, I would not have been surprised to see those odds closer to 200, maybe even 250, just because of the logistics of this fight. So that'll be a great fight. Moving on to our main event. A lot of question marks here. You got Henry Cejudo, Triple C, making the return against Aljamain Sterling, who, was a guy that early on in his championship reign was kind of disrespected by everyone because of how he won it with the illegal knee. I feel like a lot of people just discounted how good he actually is. And, you look just right before that, he submitted Corey Sandhagen and made it look easy. And you're looking at a guy in Sandhagen who is now on his own little tear within that division of taking out big names. So to me, it's a super interesting fight. However, I think that Henry Cejudo is a guy that has become so well-rounded, and he's an Olympic gold medalist in wrestling, which is kind of Sterling's bread and butter. So to me, it's such a tough matchup for Sterling. I do like Sterling as a fighter. I want to say that I might be rooting for him a little bit in this one, but I think that Triple C is a god-awful matchup for him in all departments. And for that reason, in terms of who I'm taking, I'm leaning pretty heavy towards Triple C at this point.
Yeah, I think the only saving grace for Sterling might be his reach advantage if he can be able to keep Cejudo at a distance. And both guys' movement is pretty sporadic. Both guys like to move around pretty quickly and mix up their angles on guys, which I don't know who that will necessarily serve better. If that is the case where Sterling can keep him at a distance, I think he has a good shot. And I'm with you. Like I'm a big Aljo fan, and I do think he's gotten disrespected. But with that being said, Cejudo is Cejudo, and he was on his own tear before he left the UFC, and went on this little hiatus. And just watching back some footage and stuff, when he fought Cruz and finished Cruz's movement is something that I think he uses very well to his advantage, and it didn't really seem to phase Cejudo too much. He was chopping the legs early and he was hitting them, and I think it definitely caused Dominic to slow down a little bit, and eventually Cejudo finished him. But I also think that it'll be interesting to see. I don't think Cejudo should have too much of a gas tank issue. The only thing is the layoff. You don't know how a fighter comes back from that, but I expect a guy like Cejudo to be ready to go 5 rounds. On the other hand, with Aljo, his last 3 fights, only one's gone the full 5, and I saw a little gas tank problem in that 5-round fight against Jan, and I think Jan also had a gas tank problem too, to be honest with you, because Aljo was finishing some takedowns that should not have been finished. And
to build off your point, not to cut you off there, but Aljo cuts a lot of weight for that division.
Yes,
which can be
he is massive. He's massive for that division, and so yeah, if you watch back that second Jan fight that Aljo won by split decision, like his feints that Jan was going for were, for lack of a better, nicer term, hot garbage. I don't understand why Jan was really going for those. And it opened him up for the takedowns, and Aljo was able to do it, even though Jan actually ended up getting back on top and dominating, not dominating, but getting back on top in a better position in those last 2 rounds, which is unlike Aljo to be giving up that kind of position, which is a testament to the gas tank. And then his next fight, and his most recent fight against Dillashaw's shoulder popped out in the first like 30 seconds,
Yep.
and he just was not the same fighter after that. And Aljo put him away easy. He was just kind of playing around with him. And so with that being said, it's hard for me to take Sterling. I'm gonna go Cejudo, and I just think that Cejudo, like you said, the wrestling background mixed in with his power is something that Sterling has in the wrestling department, but he doesn't have the power. He's refined his striking a little more, and it's been a little better, but it's not as slick or is not as powerful as Cejudo will present towards him. And if Cejudo can get inside that reach, I don't really think it'll. I don't
Yep.
really think see it going any other way than Cejudo's.
Yeah, and I mean the other thing to consider with Cejudo is, and a lot of people discount this for playing a role in fights, which I think is stupid, but Cejudo's fight IQ is bananas. And, we're not talking about a guy that just took 3 years off and, was going to the beach and whatever, and then training here and there. He's been coaching fighters, and not
Yeah.
just coaching fighters, he's been coaching fighters to belts.
Mhm.
He cornered Figueiredo. John Jones went down there to work with him. He's been dealing with big names and had a lot of success on the coaching end. And one thing I have heard um, from a lot of fighters, you look at guys that have done the Ultimate Fighter series and stuff of that nature. A lot of times fighters actually get better from coaching because, you start to look at tendencies, at strategies, and reanalyzing your own game. And Cejudo already had such a high fight IQ as it is that has to have only gotten better.
Yeah.
The only thing is going to be from a physical standpoint if that layoff affects him. And I think one thing, if there is one thing that definitely plays to Sterling's advantage, even though those fights have had some weird endings, I think that his recent competition is still much better than Cejudo's recent
Hmm.
competition, which again,
Hmm.
he's a couple years removed. But, he had the win against Dominic Cruz. Cruz is obviously a legend in the UFC, but was definitely tail end of his career. We watched over the last year as he took a couple bad losses and just hasn't looked like prime Dominic Cruz. And then the fights before that, he beat Marlon Moraes, another guy that's already out of the UFC. Beat Dillashaw, which that was, Dillashaw coming down trying to challenge for his belt, cutting a lot of weight. And I think it was a matter of Dillashaw was on such a run at that point, felt a little bit invincible and like he was just going to run over the little guy and didn't know what he was biting off was Henry Cejudo at that point. And then he had the split decision win to get the belt against Demetrius Johnson, who arguably one of the best, if not the best in the sport to ever do it from a technical standpoint. That's an impressive win, but he was very compromised in that fight, and it did go to a
Yeah.
split decision. So, in terms of competition, I think Aljo has faced the better guys in his more recent fights, and it's there's just so many question marks with this fight, and with Aljo, it's again shoulder popped out with Dillashaw, so who knows how that fight plays out if Dillashaw stays healthy the whole way through. The Piotr Jan, he had the DQ that got him the belt, and then the fight that he won against Jan, kind of the similar story of where I think Jan was way too comfortable with thinking he was going to just run over Aljo based on how the first fight was going and not realizing that he's still a guy that has cleaned out that division pretty good and beaten some really big names and caught him by surprise, especially in those first few rounds. So, ton of question marks around this fight, but again, just because of the background of Cejudo and how these two match up stylistically, I think it does favor Sterling. And I think there are some tougher matchups for Cejudo in that division. And that's not to say that Aljo's not the second best guy. Again, it's just the way that they match up is doesn't play in his favor. So I am leaning towards him. It's a pick 'em fight. I think it's going to be a great fight still. And, we'll see. I'm sure both of them want to test each other's wrestling. So
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah. It should
see
be.
who can implement that game plan, and I think whoever does that is probably who ends up taking it. And if that's for Cejudo, if that means just neutralizing that and then pounding away on his feet, that could be a path to victory. So all in all, there are some really good fights on the card. We talked about it before. Definitely tune into the prelims, because I think for maybe the main event being a little bit lacking in the star power, it's not often that you see prelims that are as good as this one. So it's a good fight card to watch all the way through. Looking forward to it. Again, gave you the times this Saturday, UFC 288. And then we will pivot. Since we have taken a little bit of time off, there's been a lot of shit that's went down since we last talked, Colin, when your boy Israel Adesanya secured his first victory against Poton and got the belt back in great fashion, second round knockout. I do want to spend just a second. I want to give you your grandstand podium. Watching that fight, how excited did you get when you saw that? And were you worried leading up to the knockout?
Yeah,
Based on
so
how it was playing out, because
right,
he came out and admittedly said he was playing possum a little bit, but from an outsider perspective, it was kind of looking dangerous for a second there.
It's a dangerous game to play possum against a guy like Pereira too. You can get caught with one, you're done. But in the moment, yes, like I wasn't necessarily scared. I was like, what is he doing? Like he didn't get, like, I know the punches looked powerful he was eating, but he didn't get necessarily rocked at all. He just kind of covered up. And so I was like, I was very confused with what he was doing and slightly concerned. But dude, I mean, also, before I'd say how I felt, like the leg kicks that he was eating too were the most concerning thing. I was more concerned with the leg kicks he was eating versus the when he got cornered up there.
And he came out and said that too himself.
Yes, well, he also, and it came out that he tore his MCL in training leading up to the fight. So that, I mean, on top of that, and it makes a little more sense why he was having trouble defending those. But when he came out of that shell and just hit him with a I still, like, I was shaking. I for 10 to 15 minutes afterwards, I could not stop shaking, just ripping all the expletives in the book, just like, holy crap, that actually just happened. Like,
yeah,
an unreal moment. And frankly, probably for the best from a UFC standpoint. I think you don't want Adesanya to have to not fight in a title fight, especially with the state of the middleweight division, especially, and also if Pereira is officially going up to light heavyweight, Adesanya not being in a title fight possibly, which I think he probably would have been in the title fight regardless. But either way, I think it's good for the middleweight division, and in a kind of a stale middleweight division where I'm not looking too far ahead, and not to rant too hard, but Whitaker versus Duplessis, I do think Whitaker gets the job done there, and then where do we go from there? So
listen,
Duplessis is good. Duplessis is good. Don't get me wrong; he could definitely get it done. And the nasal surgery, I don't know if I buy into that too much, but whatever. Yeah.
No, I agree with you that I think Whitaker gets the job done in that fight. And so many people, just because of his fights with Adesanya, I think forget how good Whitaker is.
He's so good.
He's incredible. And so like good. You watch his fight against Vettori, a guy that's very sharp in all aspects. He doesn't have that lights out power, but he's still a very good striker. And Whitaker made that look easy, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And I think that it is hard to say what's next, but from where things seem to be trending, it sounds like this is going to be the contender fight for the title.
Yes.
So if Whitaker wins this, I know it's super hard to say you make that fight again, especially since he lost the first two. But with that being said, I see it very similar to the Holloway situation with Volkanovski, where it's like, if he's sitting there at that number one spot and he's not just going stalemate, he's fighting all the best guys and still beating them. It's like, you kind of force the cards on the UFC there. Like, how do you not get a title fight after having, 3, 4, whatever, top 5 wins since you last lost the title fight? And by all means, the first fight, Adesanya put a stamp on that one, won the belt. The second fight was really close, I thought. I still gave Adesanya the nod there, but at least from a UFC standpoint now, you can justify it as, look, this guy's clearing out the division. He's next in line, and the last fight was super close. So that's why we're making this again. And just because of the two names, I think regardless, that fight does good numbers again because people love Whitaker, people love Adesanya. It's been rumored that if Whitaker does win the belt, that they've looked at targeting that event for Australia, which that would make all the sense in the world. And I think that's the UFC's play. If you're going to make that fight again, make it on home turf for really both of them. I mean, Adesanya's up the road in New Zealand. So I would honestly, I'm interested to see that fight again. And it's the same thing with Holloway and Volkanovski when they fought for the third time. I still wanted to watch it just because of how good both of those fighters are.
Definitely.
So I like that fight, but yeah, you're right. You can't count out Duplessis either because he's been on his own tear. So we'll see what happens there. And they have a good storyline if he does win that because he's made all the comments about, that being African and being the true African. And then Adesanya came back and said he was going to drag his carcass across Africa. So
by the way, I get the trash talking on that, but like, as few fighters as there are from like truly from Africa in the UFC, why would you try to drag someone that's like trying to carry on your heritage and like your country's heritage? Like, I don't know. Personally, I don't understand the trash talking. I get he's just trying to make waves, and it did make waves. So props to him for getting the clicks. But
it caught his attention.
From a standpoint of like taking pride as an African, I get it and I don't get it. I think it was a little iffy in my opinion, but I'm also defending Izzy. So
no. And one more thing before we move on, I do have to ask, because this has been a big controversy from that fight. What did you think, trying to be as unbiased as possible, about the post-fight antics of Adesanya? Because I've got my opinions and I support some of it, and some of it I was kind of iffy on. So I wanted to hear your take on it. I'm talking everything from the arrow shooting to the flop in front of the kid. And it's hard to say because when you're talking about a guy that has that much emotion going into a fight, he had obviously lost to him the previous 3 times, and it was a huge stepping stone for him to get over that hump. So I understand the outpour of emotion 100%.
Yeah.
But there's still controversy behind it, so we got to talk about it.
I'm rocking with it, and simply not because it's Izzy. I think I saw on the embedded, and I get he's a kid, but at the same time, like, you got to learn your lessons at some point. And on the embedded, everyone's like, and people that hadn't seen it were like, oh, he was a kid when it happened. Like he didn't know any better and all that stuff. On the embedded, Pereira's son acknowledged he knew exactly what he was doing and he enjoyed doing it. Like he knew what he was doing at the time. And it was a cocky move. Like it's BS. Like I think in any other sport where something, if you can, I don't know how I would compare the magnitude of getting knocked out by someone and that happening in your face. If in any other sport, I would say maybe it's childish, but like it's fighting, and you like getting knocked out is like, it's not pretty from your own for yourself. And so from that aspect, I get it, and I don't hate it by any means. Like I thought frankly, I thought it was funny, and I think I think again, you got to learn at some point. I don't blame Pereira for being upset that he did it, and I don't blame Adesanya for doing it. And then outside of that, all the other stuff was free game, in my opinion.
Yeah. So my take on it is, I thought that the arrow shooting after the knockout was one of the cooler celebrations I've seen, and just because you knew what was going into it, and that like he had just gotten over this huge hump of a guy that's given him problems for years upon years. And the way he did it, and then the way he celebrated, I thought that was awesome. My problem with the kid thing, though, was I think it kind of it kind of took away from that moment in a sense. Not to say that the kid didn't know what he was doing, because like you said, he acknowledged he did. But with that being said, my issue with it is I think he was 5 at the time he did that. Now he's like, I don't know, 9 or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like the poor kid just had to watch his dad go unconscious.
Yeah.
And then you throw that on top of it, and he's probably having nightmares at this point.
Yeah.
All in all, I think it is a little bit of fair game. You're right. My biggest issue with it was I thought it took away from his moment of celebrating getting over this huge hump in Perea, because the celebration before that, I was like, this is awesome. Like, this is such a cool moment for him. And then, something like that brings controversy to it, which is unfortunate. But I had to ask about it because the internet was clearly buzzing. But that was a great fight and cool for him to see. Definitely think Poton moves up to 205, and he's a problem there for anyone. I mean, not to go back to this, but you talked about the leg kicks. I was just listening to Adesanya's coach, Eugene, talk about that. And first of all, you're talking about 2 of the highest level kickboxers ever. And he said, we still don't understand how he does that. He said he does not telegraph those kicks at all. He's like, we watched hours and hours of film, and we thought we had it down. We thought we knew how he telegraphed it. And then he completely switched up how he threw the kicks in that fight. And he's like, you can't see him coming. Like, the feints are always different. So I like that kind of stuff, because I think it's cool to like hear the super technical side of it get brought into it, because everyone knows those 2 are masters of their craft, but you never really hear like the fine details of it. And so he's going to be a problem at 205. And I think Izzy continues to be a problem at 185, especially if that move becomes official. So I'm looking forward to both those guys competing in their respective divisions. Talk about another guy that just killed himself to make that weight. Like, this could pan out better for Perea, because if you have that much power and you're cutting 40 plus pounds over the course of a little over a month, I can't imagine what a fully energized, fully built out Alex Perea looks like.
No doubt.
And then just quickly before we bounce off here, some really great fight nights in between. Hopefully you were following the Twitter for the Pavlich Blades fight, because we kind of killed it that day. Not gonna lie. But that was a great fight, and it's one Holloway versus Allen was before that. Holloway took care of business, is still doing what he's done for years upon years, and it's never not impressive when he goes out there. Just always has to face the Reaper and Volkanovski at the end of the tunnel, so that's unfortunate. But just looking at that one fight night, you got to think Pavlich is probably next for the title, given that right now they're targeting the Stipe Jones fight.
Right.
And
Jones has no interest. Jones, I don't think has any interest in fighting Pavlich, though. That's the thing.
I would have no interest in fighting either.
I just saw before we came on that Jones was like, the only fights that really make sense for him, like at this point in his career, are the Stipe fight, and if Francis decides to come back, he'll fight him. But once he says when he beats Stipe and Francis doesn't come back, I think John might be done. So then at that point, it takes on, Pavlich will definitely get the shot.
You took the words out of my mouth. I think if Jones does beat Stipe, I think that is what he has been looking for in this whole heavy, because he's made it clear himself. His whole goal is to be considered the greatest to ever do it at this sport. And in his perception, if he goes up to heavyweight, wins the title, and then also beats who everyone considers the greatest heavyweight of all time, that cements it. And that's all you've heard come from his mouth. So I think you're right. I think if he gets that job done, he probably calls it quits there, goes out on a high note. And by all means, if he does beat him, it's already hard to argue he's not the greatest of all time. He gets that win. It's kind of the Tom Brady thing where it's like, you've won time and time again and proved everyone wrong time and time again. It's so hard to not say they're not the greatest to ever do it. So I think it would be a good fight between those two, and I wish that we could see it, but I just really don't think we will. Because the question would be, does Jones get him to the ground before he eats one of those sledgehammer right hands? I can't talk enough about the power in that guy. Like it seems like anytime he touches someone, that's the fight there, and it's always in the first round. That's why it's telling that like it's not a setup that, you know, he plays a long game and then in the second round he sees the opening and attacks it. He just walks straight at you and he's like, I might eat a few, but the second you eat one of these, show's over. Everyone's going home. Which
makes not. I don't want to dive too much into. I know we're pretty much at time here, but like I don't want to dive too much into it. But which makes Blade's game plan all the more weird and
so
odd.
Weird. I agree.
And, like the internet was like, "What is he doing?" He didn't once think about trying to get. I mean, I shouldn't say he didn't once. He had one attempt to take down, but like he really seemed like he had no like he was not trying to get Pavlovich to the ground really at all, and he got destroyed. It was really odd, and especially in a fight where
odd, but I think that one comparison I can make here is when you look at the early Conor McGregor days, everyone made that argument every single fight. Why are people not just taking him to the ground and controlling him? Because you saw a few, like Chad Mendez was able to do it for a few minutes there, but I think it is just the effect of, in order to get that takedown, you're going to have to shoot in.
Yeah.
And when you shoot in, if you get caught, that could be the night. And I think Blades was a little bit just, you know, stuck in that fear of, if I dive in and he throws an uppercut, like I'm in the hospital when I wake up.
It's the Derek Lewis effect from when he fought Lewis.
Yeah, exactly.
I would not be surprised if he had that in the back of his head. Yeah.
You look at a guy in Pavlovich who KO'd Derek Lewis. So it's like he's even more of a threat. I really think if Jones wins against Stipe and retires as we're kind of predicting here, I think Pavlovich goes on to win that belt. And it's really hard to see him losing to any of the guys in that division right now. Especially, you talk heavyweight, a lot of them are that big bopper type where they're looking to land that one blow. And 100 out of 100 times in those fights, based on what I've seen, I'm taking Sergey.
Sure.
Yeah. But anyways, folks, we're going to wrap that one up here. Another episode of the Overhand Hour. Again, tune into UFC 288 this weekend. Main card starts at 10 Eastern time. And we, of course, will be tweeting out all of our picks for you guys, giving some recaps. So be sure to tune into the Twitter, and we'll have this up on YouTube. Thanks, folks.